This video is for adult collectors because I talk for a really long time about something that started in the 80s. So, there's mini-bots, and then there's more mini-bots. And these are only some of them. Let's talk about that. ES Collectioneers. Okay, so the problem with trying to collect anything, of course, is deciding where your collection starts and where your collection ends. If you've watched my channel at all, you know that I really like video games, but I also really like collecting toys and action figures and things. And the funny thing is that all of these things are really interesting and really nerdy and really cool when you get into the nitty-gritty of them. But even the cheap stuff can add up over time. So lately I've been trying to more narrow down the scope of things that I collect. I have struggled in the past with seeing something really cool and being like, oh, I want that. I'm going to buy that because I have the money right now. I'm going to do that. And that is not a healthy way to live, regardless of how you live your life. But one of the collections I'm working on right now are mini-bots. If you don't know what mini-bots are, which you might not because it was a concept that started in the 80s, is early on in the Transformers toy line, you basically had figures like Bumblebee, right? Where it was a teeny tiny car that looked very much like a toy rather than a small handheld representation of a real world item. And so you had all of these small price point figures that were created, one, to sell more toys in general, but two, it would be easy enough for a parent to be like, oh, alright, I'll buy that for my kid because it doesn't cost a whole lot and it's small and all that, And there were actually quite a few different mini-bots over the years. Now, recently, well, I say recently, but starting back with the War for Cybertron trilogy that Transformers put out back, gosh, I want to say that started maybe 8 years ago? I'll have to fact check that. I'll put up when it says. But, back when that came out several years ago, they really hit this stride of, okay, we're going to make Transformers figures that are incredibly well posable, have a bunch of 5mm ports on them so you can kit them out with all kinds of weapons, and we're going to make them look as close to how they look in the cartoons as we possibly can. And since they started doing those things, they've really done a fantastic job of all of those things, really. Standard articulation for toys now, or for their Transformers toys now is, you got your waist swivel. We can get in close here. You got your bendable elbows. A lot of even the smaller guys have wrists that you can twist. Shoulder movement is a pretty standard thing. Obviously, the head. Let me see if I can get this to focus on Bumblebee and not me. The head can turn from side to side. There we go. You can turn the head around and all that. And then the legs are also pretty well articulated. You can kick up, you can go out to the side and all that. And ankle tilts like that, where it's actually the ankle moving from side to side. That's another really huge thing that they added to these. Oh, and then, of course, this one's a little stiff because of the way he's made, but obviously they can bend the knees as well. Come on, focus. Yeah, see? So they can bend the knees. They've got all this articulation now, and it's been so fantastic because a lot of the new toys, like this came out in the last 2 years, I want to say. a lot of the toys on the toy scene have just been phenomenal. And a lot of toys have been just garbage at the same time, because it seems like they have like their three main categories of figures that they make. And two of them kind of blend together these days. You've got your Studio Series toys, which are basically... Nowadays, they focus on making incredibly show-accurate versions of the characters, but it started with making decent toys of the figures from the Michael Bay series. And this is empty. So it started with making figures of the Michael Bay series of movies, right? So you had the live-action Transformers movies. I think the first one was in 2007, and then the most recent one would have been Rise of the Beast, and I think it was either 23 or 2024. And they make toys of every single movie that came out, and they're still doing toys for Transformers 1, which was a fully animated movie. And the main series of toys they've been doing from that are based off of the Transformers 86 movie, which is, the original movie that came out in theaters back in 1986. This Bumblebee, actually, if I can get the camera to focus on him, this is a Studio Series 86 figure. And he's really, really small. And I've got this guy here. This is Gears, right? See if it'll focus on him. Maybe if I hold it closer. Yeah, so this is Gears. And he's also a mini-bot. And he's a bit bulkier because Bumblebee is one of the smallest, but they're pretty comparable in size, you know? They're pretty relatively similar in size. This one is from their other, main toy line that they do. At the time, it was called Transformers Legacy. I think there was Legacy Evolution, and then Legacy United, I think? I don't know. They do their toy lines in, spans of 3 years. So they've got the Transformers Studio Series toy line, which has been pretty consistent, and they just pick and choose what things that they make figures out of. They've done all of the Michael Bay movies. They're still doing those. They did Transformers 1. They're still working on that toy line. They've got 86, and then they've also got their Gamerverse figures that they do, which are based off of the Transformers There's Transformers Devastation got a figure. They got one figure of Optimus Prime. And then there's, I think it's also called the War for Cybertron Trilogy, but it's a video game series. And they did some figures based off of that. And those figures are cool, but they're really bulky and awkward looking. I've only got a couple of those. Oh, and the Transformers Bumblebee movie, which I personally saw and really liked. That was the last Transformers movie I saw. I didn't see Transformers 1, but it looked good. They do all of those different things for their Studio Series line. And then they've got their Legacy line, or their Generations line, or right now they're doing Age of the Primes, which is their main toy line that is not attached to any particular show or movie or thing. That's the one they generally sort of do. I guess for a really long time, everything was just called Generations as their main thing. But they've also got some cartoons that are made for younger kids, and they always do toys based off of that. And those ones are hands down the worst toys. Always. Even when they do the proper $20 price point toys that are a decent figure that scales well with other figures in their other Transformers toy lines, it always feels like it's made out of cheaper material. It always has worse paint, and it always has just weaker design in theory. You know, they're always like, this was made for younger kids in mind, and so they're not great. But that's where a lot of the gimmicky toys go as well, is for the younger kids. Which, I mean, obviously, if you're going to just sell toys to sell toys, you want to make something cheap that you can sell for cheap, that is bright and colorful and uses the cheapest materials possible. And that's how you end up with super hollow-looking toys. We're not talking about those. I have, like, very few of them because there's, every once in a while, there's one that catches my eye. But today we're talking about mini-bots, right? So, the mini-bots. We were talking about those. Let's see how much I have to cut out of this. So the mini-bots were a series of very small, you know, aimed at younger kids toys for the Transformers line, where it folded up into the palm of your hand, right? And they could fit in the palm of your hand, and that's what made them mini-bots. And they're sort of treated as like this quasi-team of spies. Every mini-bot has like a different job class. I actually had a list of it. Let me see if I can find my phone, first off. Right, so I had a list of the mini-bots because after just randomly buying figures that I was like, ooh, I like that, ooh, I like that, ooh, I like that, I noticed, I was like, a lot of these guys are kind of small and they're well articulated and they're all kind of scaled the same, you know? I was thinking, I was like, okay, let me look into this. And after watching one of a few McAdams videos, fantastic guy, I love his content. He was talking about the mini-bots at some point, and I was like, oh, that's like an actual thing, let me look that up. And I found this list of the mini-bots, like, by the years the original toys came out. And I was like, oh, I have like a quarter of these, maybe I'll just make this a collection I'm doing. And then I looked to see, you know, how many of these characters had modern iterations at the time. And I found out that I actually did have quite a few. You know, I've got Bumblebee, I've got Gears, I've got Warpath and Brawn, and at some point, Scarlett's mom actually got me for, I think it was either Christmas one year or my birthday one year, she got me this 2-pack that they made of these two guys, which are called, this one's Road Ranger, and this one's Puffer. And these guys are actually repaints. They might have different heads, or they might have new heads. Or, sorry, they might have new heads, or they might have just recolored heads. Of two other characters called Huffer and Pipes, right? Because see, you got Huffer and Pipes, and then you've got Puffer, and then they're just like, oh, let's just pull a name out of nowhere for the fourth one. It felt like that, anyways. Road Ranger's actually a GoBot, but we don't need to get into that at the moment. But, you know, there's all these different dudes. And it's like, alright, well, let's see if I have any figures that can fill in the gaps so far. So there's Bumblebee, right? And then there's Brawn, which at the time I didn't have, and he was out of stores, but he wasn't that expensive to pick up, so I got myself a Brawn. You know, this is probably like a year ago. I don't remember what I paid for this guy, but it wasn't nearly as much. The aftermarket on Transformers, even modern toys, is insane. It is insane because there's a so a while back, before we got this Bumblebee, which is the Studio Series 86 Bumblebee, the most recent G1 style Bumblebee. G1 meaning based off of like the original Transformers cartoon, Generation 1. Before that, they had in the War for Cybertron Earthrise series, I want to say, they had Cliff Jumper, and then they recolored Cliffjumper into Bumblebee, and then they remolded Bumblebee to look more like a proper Volkswagen. But the Volkswagen version of Bumblebee was only available in like a special store exclusive thing for Walmart, and that was a pain to track down, but that was my definitive Bumblebee for a while. But I never got that Cliffjumper. But I did get this Cliffjumper. And I wouldn't really consider this Cliffjumper like the proper... Come on, focus. I wouldn't really consider this Cliffjumper the proper mini-bot stand-in for my collection of mini-bots. This guy was actually part of another collection I was working on, because during the Legacy toy line, what they were doing, instead of making a ton of toys that were good representations of Generation 1 continuity figures, they actually were taking characters from all sorts of different parts of the Transformers toy line, or the Transformers... God, I don't even know what you'd call it. Literally the legacy of Transformers. They were taking characters from across the entire board and making new toys of these characters. Pretty much every character got a new toy. Well, not every character. A lot of characters got new toys, though. And I remember when I was in high school, I really liked the Transformers Prime cartoon. I think there's multiple Transformers Primes cartoons, but it's the one that, it's the one where RC was a blue motorcycle and was one of the main characters, and it had the 3 kids as like the main human characters. I really like that cartoon, but I didn't get to see nearly as much of it as I wanted to. And this Cliffjumper is the new toy for Cliffjumper from that universe. And it's a really good toy, and I really like the way it looks, but it really doesn't match up with the other mini-bots that I have, you know, because it's very clearly not a G1 style toy, or G1 style figure. It doesn't fit with any of the other guys. It's small enough to stand side by side with him and be like, alright, that's the red one, right? But it doesn't fit the mold for this collection. Likewise, they also did animated Bumblebee. And Transformers Animated is going back quite a ways for the legacy of the series, because Animated was the current cartoon at the time, briefly before Michael Bay directed and produced, or he put out the first Transformers live-action movie back in 2007. This is from the cartoon that was out at that time. It was just called Transformers Animated. And they actually did a few characters from the animated continuity, which is cool. I think they did Bumblebee, I was about to say Bulkhead, but that was actually the Transformers Prime version of Bulkhead. So they did animated Bumblebee, they did animated Optimus Prime, they did animated Motormaster in the last year of Legacy, and I got that Motormaster, and he actually looked really good. But he's just black and purple Optimus Prime with a different head. And then, I don't know if Nemesis Prime was actually in the cartoon, but they just recently, like in the last month, came out with a 4-pack of random characters, and it's like, it's Bumper, which is a remold of this Bumblebee, right? This is animated, this is G1. They did a remold, or not even a remold, they gave G1 Bumblebee here a different head, and then made him like a slightly darker yellow, I think. And that's Bumper, which is a callback to, I guess, a rather rare original 80s toy called Bumper, which was it was just like the Cliffjumper toy in the Bumblebee colors, I think. And then they did, what else was in that pack? They had G1 Ultra Magnus without his armor, and that one was weird. because so the original Ultra Magnus in like the original toy, it was the Optimus Prime toy, but all white, and then he came with a trailer that like combined onto him to make armor, and that became Ultra Magnus. So Ultra Magnus has like an unarmored form and a fully armored form. And in this 4-pack, they had Ultra Magnus without his armor, so it's just white Optimus Prime. But it's based off of a toy they did for Legacy that is like a recreation of the Generation 1 Optimus Prime toy. It's really cool that they did it, and really weird that they did it, because at the same time, in one of their like more expensive like collectors toy lines that they're doing, called Missing Link, they already did Optimus Prime. They've done like 3 of him for their Missing Link line. And everybody looked at this G1 style Optimus Prime toy from Legacy, and they're just like, oh, that's just a budget Missing Link Optimus Prime. That's exactly what it is. I actually really want it just so I can have something that's an analog for the original Optimus toy. And I don't really need it. So they had Bumper, they had animated Nemesis Prime, which I'm not sure if that actually was a thing in the cartoon. They have unarmored G1 Ultra Magnus in the Legacy style. And then, what was the 4th one? It was Bumper, Magnus, Nemesis Prime, and I'm going to put it up on the screen because I don't remember what it was. But yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, I like the guys in this 4-pack. I don't know if I want to buy the 4-pack just to get Bumper, just for the Minibots collection. It seems like a waste of money, honestly. But when you're collecting things, is it a waste? Is it a waste if it's your hobby is collecting these things? I don't know. You know, that's why I have so many of them. But anyways, I wanted to talk about the figures that I do have, right? And it's funny because I've got all these stand-ins. I don't even have a whole lot of stand-ins. There's so many that I have, and then there's so many that I don't have. And it feels like I've got half of them, and then I look at the list of what I actually have, and it's like, no, that's more like a third. And some of the ones in your collection are repeats of characters, sort of. Because I've got Bumblebee, the OG, the mascot of the series next to Optimus Prime and Megatron now. Then I've got animated Bumblebee. He doesn't need to be on the shelf with the other Minibots. He doesn't look like the other Minibots, but he's so cool. He's made really well. I have one of the original animated Bumblebee toys. I'm sad though because one of the times I was playing with him, I was pretending like he was dismembered, and so I was popping his arms and his head off of his ball joints, and when I went to go put them back on, the ball joint for the head like broke. I don't know if it'll stay on now or not. I haven't messed with it in years. I'm not sure. I know I still have it. I don't know where it is at the moment. It's in a bin in my garage. But like, this guy doesn't need to be on the shelf. He doesn't match with anything, even though he's a modern toy, right? And then I've got Gears, right? And then I've got the Cooler Gears, right? Actually, this sword isn't his. I just gave it to him. But this is the Cooler Gears, right? It's like Daniel and the Cooler Daniel. And the reason I say this is cooler is because I really fell in love with this figure when it came out and I picked it up. I love the red and the blue. I love his grouchy little face. He's got like the perfectly sized gun for him. Because it's like, it's big, but it's not bulky feeling, right? Let me see if I can, I think I gotta do the hand trick. The hand trick. Come on, don't look at me. Don't look at me. Come on. Look at the figure. But yeah, see, it's, you know, it's just, he's super posable too. He's got double jointed elbows. He's got double jointed knees, you know, so he can fully bend his elbows. He can fully bend his knees. On his arms, because of the way they transform, they've got this thing that people call a butterfly joint, which means basically his elbow or his shoulder can shift forward and back so that he can reach further across his chest. And he's just super posable, and even though his head is basically the size of a Lego brick, he can still fully turn his head from side to side. You know, it doesn't get in the way of anything except his backpack, which you can shift a little bit out of the way, and then he can completely turn his head, and it doesn't break up the figure at all. He's fully posable. He's amazingly well done, right? And then I found out they were doing this retro toy line, where basically, and I've got the box hanging over my computer right here, actually, so 1 second. Okay, so they were doing this toy line where basically they were selling modern figures but slightly redesigned to be in their original toy style, so that you had Gears here with his big grumpy face, right? And then they were going to do a reproduction of him that was designed with his original toy face, which is just like a generic robot with a visor and all that. But I actually really like the design. And they gave him a much lighter blue, and they changed the way that the parts of the toy were painted. And so he really pops in a different enough way that you could put these two side by side and be like, oh wow, those guys must be twins or something in the cartoon, because they're different enough that you're like, wow, that sure is the same toy, but they sure don't look like the same guy at all. And the way they made the packaging for the toy is really cool too, because it's on a blister pack, which is the standard like cardboard with the actual like bubble that goes around the figure and all that. And on the back they have, you know, like the classic 80s style artwork. On the front they do too. And they even have like this thing here that they made, which is like the bio of the character plus like what their stats are. And it's a really cool way that they sold this toy. It's a really cool way that they convinced me to buy two of the same toy, essentially. It was different enough on a toy that I liked enough that I was like, yes, I want two of this guy. Because even though it's literally the same toy, it looks different enough that I would love to have it. And it's funny, after I saw this guy, before I decided to buy the first one that I got, I looked him up, because I wanted to know about the character, because I was like, that's a really well done toy. Who is this guy? What does he do? And apparently, in some of the old Transformers comics that Marvel made, there was a crossover where this guy and Black Suit Spider-Man worked together to like scale a cliff to go fight some bad guys. I'll put a blurb up on that a little bit. But just wow, such a good design, and he's got Spider-Man's colors, and he actually worked with Spider-Man, and they didn't clash too much because Spider-Man was wearing a different costume at the time, and I was like, that's really interesting. And the funny thing is because he's so small, he and Spider-Man were really close in size in the comic book. Like, obviously the robot that turns into a truck is going to be bigger. But still, it was cool. And then, I think before any of these really came out, any of the ones that I have here right now, back when they were doing Transformers War for Cybertron trilogy, way back then. Okay, some of these actually are probably around that old. No, Brawn was 86. And then these Puffer and Road Ranger were a special edition thing around that time. But this is Warpath. He turns into a tank. If the camera would focus on him, you would see that he's got a tank turret for a chest, and tank treads for feet and arms. And this guy's really cool, but unfortunately, my copy has a really loose leg on him. And so he can't really stand up super well in any particularly insane poses, and he can't hold like something that's really heavy because he'll just flop over immediately. But I mean, on his own, he does quite well. He does quite well just standing there, right? And I gotta say, he's one of the ones that feels the most out of place because he's one of the much more bulky ones. But he's one of the guys. He's one of the dudes. He's one of the mini-bots. You know? And then we've got the most special one in the collection that I personally have at the moment. I have Transformers Legacy Cosmos. For those who know, you might see this and you'd be like, oh, is that the original run that nobody was able to get? Or is that the new run that like 5 people were able to get? And the thing about this guy is, I don't know how long it's been going on for, because I didn't used to have my pulse on Transformers the way that I do now. But over the last, 8 to 10 years, maybe, when they really started working hard on these new designs that could accommodate all of these posability options and all of these, you can stick this many guns and things on them. There were all these different sublines that they made for the main line, right? There was the Netflix series that they made for War for Cybertron, and then they turned. It's funny. They made the War for Cybertron trilogy toy line, which was the first year was Siege, the second year was Earthrise, and the third year was Kingdom. And basically, Siege had all these characters where it was their first, really well-made toy that appeared for the first time in a long time. And it had all these traits, but it was based off of their Cybertronian mode. And so you got things like Soundwave, who instead of turning into a cassette player or a boombox or whatever, he turned into a generic spaceship that was shaped like a brick, right? And then all of the characters from Siege had a ton of painted on scuff marks and things to make them look like they were battle damaged, because there was a siege going on. There was a war for Cybertron going on. And they really leaned into that with that first year with most of those first figures. And some people liked it, some people didn't. I thought it was neat, but after a while I was just like, I would rather they just look like clean toys, like pretty much all of these guys do. It's like a cool special edition thing, but when every figure does it, it's like, I don't want my toys to look pre-dirtied. And then they had Transformers Earthrise, where they took all of the Siege toys and the Cybertronian characters, and they made them look like they should on Earth. Where they were actually actively trying to blend in, and things were more like espionage, supposedly. And that's where you got a lot of the characters that, they started to move away from the paint, the painted on scuzz and scuffs and all that. And then War for Cybertron Trilogy Kingdom basically jumped into the let's bring back all of the Transformers Beast Wars characters and make good modern toys of them as they appeared at the beginning of Beast Wars. And that was also really cool, and I got a ton of those guys. I could do a video on them. But they also re-released a lot of other figures and made good versions of figures for the first time for there. That was the first time the most recent mold of Galvatron showed up, actually, was in War for Cybertron Kingdom. But he had there was a common issue where they would build the shoulders upside down by accident. And it was like a whole process to try and fix them. And so I waited on that one because I didn't want to buy one that had painted on scuds that had badly made shoulders that didn't work right, you know? And luckily, in Transformers Legacy, they re-released him without the scuds painted on, and they fixed the shoulders, so I got him eventually. God, I'm just rambling. So, they had sub-toy lines, though. The earliest one that I can think of right now is the War for Cybertron Trilogy Netflix subline. So basically what they had was, they had the War for Cybertron Trilogy toy line, which was the 3 years, and then they made a Netflix show based off of that covered each of those toy lines and the story that was supposed to overarch to combine each toy line. And to be like, this is what's going on, this is how we're telling the story, these are why these characters have these things going on. And then they made a subline that was special versions of characters based off of their appearance in the Netflix show. And so you had like an Ultra Magnus toy, and then in the show they showed Ultra Magnus, and he was all like grungy and scuzzy and all that, and then they made the Netflix toy line Ultra Magnus that was even more grungy and scuzzy looking than that original toy. And he came with a couple of other things, and I was like, that's interesting. But the real kicker, right? If you wanted the modern Bumblebee toy that actually turned into a Volkswagen Beetle, it was only in that Netflix subline of the War for Cybertron trilogy. And then if you wanted a figure of Soundwave that actually turned into a cassette tape, or a cassette player, he was only in that toy line that way. Otherwise, you had to buy the weird, stupid brick spaceship version of him. And nobody really liked that. And that's not a problem, right? The sub-toy lines are not an issue so long as they're relatively easy to find and they don't get scalped, essentially. But the problem is they weren't relatively easy to find because I guess there was like a zombie subplot. And so when you would go to Walmart, you know, they'd have a billion of the zombie versions of characters from that toy line, from that subline, right? But then the characters that everybody wanted, like Bumblebee and Soundwave, were impossible to find because everybody bought them as soon as they showed up, and scalpers would go and buy all the ones they could find and then resell them for like double, triple the price. Shit, people do that with regular figures now. And so the problem with that is my sticking point with all that, my reason for bringing this up is that, you know, Cosmos, this toy, as I have it right now, the original run of this guy was short packed, meaning, so there was a Walmart exclusive toy line for Transformers Legacy, and it was like the Speedia 500, which in the multiverse of Transformers, the idea of the Speedia 500 was that it was a race on a race planet. It was like a car race on a planet where their whole thing is going fast, and whoever won the race became the ruler of the entire planet for like a year, or however long until the next race. And Cosmos was one of the toys that was in this toy line. There were a couple other exclusives as well. I picked up one of them because I really liked it. I think it was Scourge, which is like a very specific version of a Nemesis Prime, but I won't get into that. But like, this guy was short packed, meaning if you are a toy company and you want to sell your product at a store, you send them a case of your product that has a certain number of each thing in that case for that store to then put on the shelves and sell. And so if you have like 20 Transformers in a case and there's like 2 of each character, and then that's like, you really only have 10 characters in that case, right? Even though there's 20 toys you can sell. This guy was like 1 to a case out of like 20, I want to say. That I'm pulling numbers out of my butt, but the idea was that there was very few of him compared to however many there were of all of them in general. And because of that, they were incredibly scarce, and the people who did buy them would then resell him for ridiculous value. This was a $25 toy when it came out, and the only time I ever saw it anywhere that I could buy it, the cheapest I found it for was someone was selling it at a convention for $90 out of box. As just this, without the box, without the instructions, just him with his little flag. They wanted $90 for it. And that's insane. That's insanity. For like a 5-inch action figure, $90 is not okay. You know, there's some people out there, there's some hardcore collectors who would pay any price for anything. Hell, I've had my moments. There's this one action figure that I really liked where at the time I had the money, I spent $300 for it. It was insane. Totally not worth it. They reprinted it like 2 years afterwards. But, you know, in the moment, when you're a collector, you don't know that they're going to remake the toy. You don't know if they're going to remake it. You don't know if it's going to be popular enough to stick around. And so you're like, oh my god, I've been looking for this thing. I got to pick it up. Oh my god, it's here. I have the money. I'm doing this. That's a bad mindset to have for somebody who spends money too easily. Anyways. So like at the time, this guy was incredibly hard to find or incredibly expensive to find. And I was like, damn, I really wanted that guy because I really like his UFO mode. I think he's adorable. I think he's just a great design in general. And it'd be cool to have this guy. But I guess I had to pass him up at the time. And then towards the end of Legacy, they re-released him individually in his own box. And I actually still have the box. Let me grab that real quick. It's like right over here. You know, proof of what I'm saying. This is like the standard Legacy United box, just with Cosmos on it, you know? And they sold him at the same regular price that he normally should have been for a deluxe class figure, which are these smaller, you know, $20 price point figures. Unfortunately, I didn't buy him at that point either. I think I ended up spending like $30 on this guy, which is not bad by any measure. God, if you can buy a figure that's like $25, if you're on like the aftermarket looking for something and it's only like $35 when it was originally $25, you're lucky. You're incredibly lucky. I'm trying to go back and get some of these older mini-bots from like earlier in the Siege toy line. And people want like $80-90 for these guys that were only like $25. And it's like, where are you getting these numbers from, dude? I guess the right people will buy them though. But yeah, so it's hard trying to decide, you know, it's hard trying to track down all of the characters for a collection when some of them don't exist yet. Some of them don't have, you know, decent modern iterations. Some of them, you know, you have a figure of the character, but it's the wrong version of the character. So it's like, that's a cool stand-in. That's not the G1 character, though. You know? And then some of them, like the 2 Bumblebees I have, like these guys definitely are the same scale and they look fine together, but they're not part of the same like group of figures because they're not built with the same design traits in mind. And it's like, it's such a pain trying to collect things. It's ridiculous. It really is. Because it's like, oh, this would be a cool collection. They're small, so they won't take up too much space. And there's only like 20 of them, and I already have like 10 of them. And then you look at the details and you're like, shit, I don't have half of the collection. I've got a third of it. And trying to get the ones that are already out is going to be a money drain. But yeah, it's just neat how every single character has their own little story. Like when I got Braun, right? I think I actually picked up Braun when I first decided I wanted to start collecting all of the mini-bots, because I had enough of them to be like, this could be a sub-collection on its own. Let me see what kind of options there are for getting Braun. And at the time, they were selling in my local Target store, they were selling this 2-pack that was Studio Series Braun and Studio Series Ratchet, who is like the medic. He turns into an ambulance. But the problem was, they were based off of the scene in the Transformers movie where, I think it's towards the beginning of the movie, the Decepticons break onto the Autobots' ship and they kill a bunch of the characters, including Braun and Ratchet. And that 2-pack of Braun and Ratchet was them with screaming faces and like holes in them and like battle damage painted on and all that. And I was like, I don't want Braun in his final moments being shot to death. I just want the dude who looks good on the shelf, who's just like, I'm Braun, hello. And so I had to, go online and find him somewhere and be like, oh, okay, that's too expensive. Oh, okay, that's a reasonable price. Oh, okay, that actually is what I will pay for it. And then I buy it. And, doing that for so many characters can be a real pain. And then, if you're hunting in stores for something that's, like, out now, like, there's, for these style of figures, they did Gears, Bumblebee, and they're coming out with Sea Spray. Sea Spray is either out or he's coming out. Sea Spray is not a figure, or not a character I have a toy of, but he's like a little white, blue, and yellow hovercraft dude. And he looks really cool, and I really like his design, so it's like, oh, I'm definitely getting him for the Minibot collection. But it's like trying to find something in person when you've only got like 3 or 4 stores you can go to before you're driving more than an hour away to just go on a toy hunt. It's kind of, it can be a slog. It can be a pain. It can be a painful journey sometimes, because you're like, oh, I'm going to go check the stores. Okay, I've checked all the stores and they don't have it. I'll look online. Oh, this person is reselling it for like a 300% price increase. I guess I'm not buying a $20 toy for $150. It's just, it's one of those things where you gotta like look at yourself in the mirror sometimes and be like, how far am I going to go for this action figure that's I'm realistically gonna play with it a few times, but mostly just display. It's like, ugh. And then even shopping online, sometimes it's like, oh, I can get it from these guys for the regular retail price, and then $15 shipping. It's collecting things is something else, man. It's great when you can find something easily and be like, yeah, I'll pay that price for that, and yeah, that'd be a perfect addition to my collection. And like, that's why you have stand-ins sometimes when you're a toy collector, because it's like, sure, this cliff jumper isn't the proper cliff jumper to go with all of these guys. Sure, he doesn't match the design characteristics. Sure, he doesn't look quite right in general for multiple reasons, but it's the guy. It's the only version of the guy I have that's got modern articulation that looks good on the shelf with the other characters. He's going on the shelf. For now, at least. Until I can find a reasonably priced version of the one that I want, he's just going to hang out with the others for now. But yeah, and I do really like these guys. I love how small they are. I've always had this weird thing where I always wanted the bigger, more expensive figures and toys, and I always end up buying a ton of the smaller guys instead. And it's sort of evolved into this, well, I like the smaller guys, though, because they're so small. They're so small. They're so small. They're friend-shaped. Especially this guy is friend-shaped. He's absolute unit, and he's 2 sauce tall. You know? How do you look at something small and not think, at least in some part of your brain, that thing's tiny. That's adorable. I want it. And that's why I started really collecting the mini bots. Is because they're small and they're chunky, and some of them are grouchy old men, and some of them are just little friends. And some of them, like this guy, have the rifle from Halo for no apparent reason. But there it is. You know? And, like, not all of their vehicle modes are great. You know? Warpath turns into a tank, and it's a really well done tank. And then you've got the Puffer and Road Ranger molds, where they turn into mini trucks, which are great. I love the way the mini truck looks, but they don't sit flat, and so their wheels barely touch the table when they're sitting there, and they just sit on their chests from their robot modes, essentially, and they don't really work well as car toys. They're better as robots, you know? And then you've got figures like Braun, which is a really good combination of the two. He's probably got the smallest. He and Bumblebee are the two, like, smallest vehicle modes out of this entire group here. But he folds up really well into his vehicle mode, and the way he folds out into a robot is actually really clever. And he's not the best of either, particularly. He's just like a little tiny Jeep, and then he turns into a little tiny grouchy old man. And there's something cute about them. And I really like them. And I really like every single one for what each one of them is. Except Cliff Jumper. But I do eventually plan to get that Cliff Jumper figure from War for Cybertron. It's just a matter of tracking one down that I can afford, that I'm not going to spend an exorbitant amount of money on. If you're going to spend more than $40 on something, it better be priced at $40 and not something someone's trying to, you know, rake you over the coals for. Anyways, I've gone on for quite long enough about the mini bots here, so I think I'm gonna leave it here. And my favorite has got to be Retro Gears, just straight up. I really love both Gears, but Retro Gears I think just has it. He just cinches the victory, and so he gets the Transformers Construct Bots blue sword, and he gets to pretend it's the Star Saber and cut through the video. End of video. End of rambling. There's my rant. There's my rant on mini-bots. Alright? We'll have some good shots of each guy at the end. We'll have them back in front of the backdrop that I painstakingly developed for my Mega Man action figures, which I'll probably do another video on those guys. I'll probably do that next. I was going to do that first. It was going to be just on Electman, and then I got all of the ones that are out so far. So I'll just do that next. That'll be the next video, I think. So yeah. These are all of the microbots, or mini-bots, rather, that I've got. I've got, you know, this is Warpath in his tank mode, with his little turret that turns and goes up and down, which is pretty cool. And the treads don't work, but he has little rolly wheels, so that's pretty nice. And this was from War for Cybertron Kingdom, so he's got a ton of these little ports on him, in kind of weird places in his vehicle mode. but the vehicle modes were not really the primary modes that they were looking at for ports. This is Puffer in his vehicle mode, you know. This is Road Ranger, or Hypes, is what I think I'm going to start calling him. Because these guys are recolors of Huffer and Pipes. So, Puffer and Hypes. Although, Road Ranger is a GoBot, apparently. That was a whole rabbit hole I went down earlier today. Just looking that up. I'm gonna move these guys out of the way so I can grab the other ones. And we've got G1 Minibot Toyetic Bumblebee. This is the G1 Bumblebee's car mode. And then this is Animated Bumblebee's car mode. And I really like that they included both his stingers, which was his weapon. He would basically flip out these things and connect his hands together, and it would make like a big stinger thing. And they also included his like jets, his rockets for his jetpack. I thought that was really cool because I have the original toy of this guy, and it's like 5 to 10 times bigger than this, but it was still a relatively small thing. And I really appreciate that detail. So there's those two guys. Then we've got Cosmos in his UFO mode. I didn't really like this version of it at first because I had the Generations Cosmos, which was a lot more flat and disc-shaped. But I've grown to like this sort of 80s styles disc with a tube on top of it, UFO. This is Legacy United Gears with his gun on the side, you know. And then really almost no visible parts. You can see his hands there and his head, but you can just turn them so that you don't really see him, which is nice. Although the chest plate being the complete back of the thing is not great. But, you know, it also just kind of looks like a weird back of a truck. This is retro toy style gears, and the sword that I gave him fell off because it's not really designed for regular Transformers. This is Braun in his Jeep mode. You know, he's nice, and I was thinking he was about the same size as Bumblebee, but really together he's twice as big, which kind of makes sense. A Jeep would be much larger than this sort of like, I don't know, this isn't even a Volkswagen, this is like a Pinto almost. This is a generic car. And then we've got Cliff Jumper, which is still sort of the odd one out. He looks a lot more like a regular car, minus the weapons stuck on the side. He looks a lot more like a regular car than these other guys, unfortunately. And then he doesn't really... actually, I guess he scales pretty decently with them. You know, he's not great, but he's not terrible either, now that I'm looking at him. I just wish that I had the other version of this guy, and I am looking at getting that one soon-ish. I guess we'll see. But yeah, these are all of the mini-bots in their various vehicle modes and such. At least all of the ones that I have, all of the characters that are mini-bots that I have that are relatively recent figures that I got. So, there we go for the vehicle modes. Between the moment when I started filming this video and when I started editing it, I actually also got this guy, Wheelie. And this is Studio Series 86 Wheelie. And he was a core class figure, which is actually quite a bit smaller than the other figures shown, even for their mini stature. You know, you've got him here in his little tiny car mode. And then to transform it was actually really simple, right? So you just pop off his hands. Unfortunately, his hands are really obvious in his car mode, but with the core class series of figures, they were
And they were the much cheaper series of figures as was, so they weren't going to be very big. Core Class in recent years is the equivalent of what the mini-bots actually used to be in the first place, being that they were cheaper, smaller, easier to make, easier to convince your parents to buy type toys, right? So he's pretty well made, I have to say. I've seen much worse Core Class figures. But he's nothing particularly special either. He's gotta... Come on, get your head out. There we go. He's nothing special, but he's not bad either. You know? He's just a little dude. And what's especially funny is I bought this guy online, and then but like 1 or 2 days later, they announced they're doing a retro style deluxe class version of Wheelie, and also a character called Outback, which I don't think they've had a modern version of for quite a while. But yeah, there's Wheelie. You know, he's not half bad. And then for scale reference, here he is next to Gears, one of the deluxe class mini bots. As you can see, he is definitely the most mini of my mini bots, but it's cool to have him here nonetheless. Anyways, back to the video. You know, I just wanted to take a moment to show off kind of how these two transform as well, because there's not a whole lot of robot mode kibble on Bumblebee. You really only just see his hands, and then his gun just like plugs onto the back, which is not ideal, but it's not a deal breaker either. I wonder if maybe I could fit it in there, but that's beside the point. And then for Gears, for either version of him, you know, like I said before, the hands and the head are visible, but especially on this retro version of Gears, his head is actually designed to look a lot more like the front end of the truck. So it doesn't look terrible there. And really, this is the bad part, because the way the hands fold up, you can't even really tell they're hands unless you really pick out the fact that you could see the individual fingers, I guess. But the back of the truck is probably the worst part. The upside down Autobot logo bothers me, but that's only because the whole chest plate is upside down, and there's not much you can do about that. You can fold this down if you want, you know, but it serves no purpose. Anyways, I'm going to transform these guys real quick on camera, though, because, you know, they're cool. They're cool little dudes. You just got to fold this down, you pull this down, and then you sort of like come here and you fold that up, fold that around, and you fold that in like that, and you got yourself a leg. And you come and do the same thing for the other side and fold that out, and then fold the heel in. You fold the chest plate up and you fold the wheels in, and then you just kind of keep that out of the way. And then for this part, you sort of pop that off and you fold the wheels in, and that is going to be his backpack, see? And then you just fold out the arms, spin around the head, straighten out the arms, right? Fold up the chest, and you got yourself a little man. There he is. You know, and you can give him his gun. Come on. It's kind of hard to do this in front of a camera. I've not really done this before. Oh, there he goes. No. And you give him whatever other accessory you might want to give him, like this pretty nice sword, right? You stand him up, you straighten out his heels, you know. You get him into whatever pose. And then there, you've got yourself a robot. And that's really simple as far as Transformers go. You know, the small ones kind of have to be simple because they either have to do a lot to make a convincing vehicle mode, or they just don't try at all. Another mini bot that I'm looking at getting soon is called Wheelie, and he's actually a core class figure, which is not a thing that they do anymore, or at least not a thing they do right now. Hold on, you gotta do the legs first on this one, I think. Anyways, Wheelie is a core class figure, which is not a thing they do anymore. And they were like the cheaper, like $10 to $12 price point for a good like 5 or 6 years. And he was a much smaller, like he's a mini bot, really. Oh, come on, I know you work. There we go. Bumblebee's got these weird like struts that fold out of the front of his vehicle mode that form like the bottoms of his feet. So like the car door has the bulk of it on the bottom, and then the front of the car actually has this tiny little bit that folds out. And you fold that in, and you fold that down, line it up, and it clicks together really, really nicely, actually. And you straighten out, his hips actually come down, like... I guess that's as strong as that connection is, until you get everything folded out properly. You fold out his arms. I'm trying to get this on camera as good as I can. It's very difficult because I'm recording this on my phone because the really nice, expensive camera we have doesn't like to focus on anything, let alone when it's moving. I might have to tweak the settings on that a little bit more. I'm still getting used to it for recording live action shots. Or rather, more movement than me just being on camera up in the corner. So you fold his head out, you hold that back in, and then you kind of fold that down, I guess, and then you got yourself a bee, and then you give him his little blaster. And he's good to go. And he's among the shortest of the bunch, honestly. Animated Bumblebee is really small too, but I feel like his shoulders being the wheels make him a lot larger in like the sort of presence that they have, you know? But like, yeah, these two guys, even though they're the same price point, they're very, very small figures. This boy, very satisfying to play with. This guy, very fiddly, but when he's in one mode or the other, it looks really, really good. Anyways, there's another close look at two of my favorite mini-bots that I've got here right now. Yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video. Check out our live stream channel on twitch.tv/Scarlet Room if you'd like to see more of Scarlet and I doing games live. And I apologize for whatever we say there because we can't censor it or cut it out. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll catch you on the next one. This is Enigma signing off. Peace out. And goodbye.